My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and for 47 years I believed in the words, "Till death do us part." Every morning for nearly half a century, I'd wake up at 5:30, make coffee for 2 iron, my husband Richard's shirts, and kiss him goodbye as he left for the law firm, where he'd been a senior partner for the last 30 years. We lived in a comfortable colonial house in Connecticut, about an hour from Manhattan, a house we'd chosen together when our children were small. A house that had witnessed birthday parties, graduations, weddings, and now echoed with an emptiness. I pretended not to notice. Richard and I met in college. He was handsome, ambitious, the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. I was studying literature, dreaming of becoming a writer. But those dreams got tucked away like old love letters in the attic after we married. Life had a different plan. First came Daniel, then 3 years later, Elizabeth. By the time I was 30, I was a full-time mother chauffeur, chef nurse, and the woman who made sure Richard's world ran smoothly so he could focus on his career. And what a career it was. Richard became one of the most respected corporate lawyers in the state. Clients flew in from all over the country to seek his counsel. Judges respected him. Colleagues admired him. And I was the supportive wife who hosted dinner parties, organized charity events, and always stood slightly behind him in photographs, smiling proudly. For 47 years that was my role, and I played it well. Until September 15th. The day my world shattered. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen as I prepared Richard's usual breakfast, 2 eggs over easy whole wheat toast and fresh orange juice. He came downstairs, adjusting his tie, the navy blue one I'd given him for our 45th anniversary. He kissed my cheek, the way he'd done thousands of times before, a gesture so routine it had lost all meaning. "Margaret," he said, sitting down at the breakfast table, "we need to talk." Those 4 words, I'd read them in novels, heard them in movies, but nothing prepares you for the moment they're directed at you. I set down his plate, my hands suddenly trembling slightly. "What is it, dear?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't touch his food, just stared at his hands, the same hands that had held mine at the altar, that had cradled our babies, that had worn a wedding ring for 47 years. The ring was still there, gleaming in the morning light. "Leaving?" he said finally. I laughed. It was absurd. "Leaving? Where are you going? Do you have a business trip?" He looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A mixture of guilt and relief and something else. "Freedom. I'm leaving. You, Margaret? I want a divorce." The coffee pot slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile floor. Brown liquid spread across the white ceramic like blood from a wound. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stood there amid the broken glass, feeling my entire life crack apart. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I've been having an affair." He continued, each word precise, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. "With Jennifer, my secretary. She's 35. We're in love. I've already spoken to my attorney. The papers will be ready by next week." Jennifer. I knew her, of course, the pretty brunette who'd joined the firm 3 years ago. Always so efficient, so helpful when I'd call Richard's office. Always so polite at the company Christmas parties. Now I understood. The late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the sudden interest in fitness and new cologne. 47 years, Richard. I finally managed to say, "We have children, grandchildren. How can you just throw it all away?" He stood up, straightening his jacket. "The children are grown. They'll understand. And I've already made arrangements. You'll be well taken care of financially. The house is yours. I'll continue to pay all the bills. You won't want for anything, except my husband. My life, my identity, Jennifer's." "Pregnant," he added, as if this explained everything. "We're starting a family. Starting a family." As if the one we'd built together had been just a practice run. A rough draft he was now ready to discard for the final version. I watched him walk out of the kitchen, heard his footsteps in the hallway. the jingle of his keys, the closing of the front door. For the first time in 47 years, Richard left for work without eating his breakfast, without kissing me goodbye, without saying, "See you tonight, honey." I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and spilled coffee until the grandfather clock in the living room chimed 9 a.m. Then I did what I'd always done. I cleaned up the mess. Swept the glass, mopped the floor, washed the dishes, put everything back in order as if order could somehow be restored to my life. The next few days passed in a blur. Richard didn't come home that night, or any night after he'd already moved in with Jennifer, had already started his new life, while I was left to dismantle our old one, box by box, memory. By memory, I began the process of erasing 47 years. I didn't call the children, not right away. I couldn't bear to hear the pity in their voices, or worse, their understanding. Daniel lived in California with his wife and twin boys. Elizabeth was in Boston finishing her residency. They had their own lives, their own families. They'd moved on long ago, leaving me behind in this big empty house, with a man who'd now left me too. Friday morning, I woke up with a headache. Not unusual given the stress of the week, but this was different. Sharp, piercing pain behind my right eye. Dizziness. When I stood up, I took some aspirin, went back to bed. Maybe if I slept, the pain would go away, along with the reality of my situation. But the headache persisted. Through Saturday, Sunday, Monday. By Tuesday, a week after Richard's announcement, I could barely see straight. The room spun when I tried to walk. My hands shook when I reached for the phone. I called Dr. Peterson, my physician for the past 20 years. His office squeezed me in that afternoon. "Margaret, you look terrible," he said, the moment I walked in. No bedside manner. But that's what I'd always appreciated about him. "Honesty, just stress," I replied. "My husband left me last week, 47 years, and he's having a baby with his secretary, Doctor." Peterson frowned. "Let's run some tests, just to be safe. Blood work, CT scan, MRI. The usual battery when doctors don't know what's wrong, but know something is." I went through the motions, numbly still thinking about Richard, wondering if he was picking. Out cribs with Jennifer planning a nursery in some new apartment I'd never see. 2 days later, Dr. Peterson called. "Margaret, I need you to come in today, it's important." His voice had changed, no longer the gruff, practical tone I was used to, something softer, more careful. The voice doctors use when they're about to deliver bad news. I sat in his office that afternoon, watching him shuffle papers on his desk, avoiding my eyes. Finally, he looked up. "Margaret, the MRI showed something, a tumor in your brain." The word hung in the air between us. "Tumor, cancer, death. It's a glioblastoma," he continued. "Grade 4. I'm sorry, but it's aggressive. We need to start treatment immediately." I heard the words, but they seemed to come from far away, as if I was underwater and someone was speaking to me from the surface. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. "With treatment, maybe a year. Without treatment, 3 to 6 months. A year. Less time than it takes to plan a wedding. Less time than a pregnancy. Less time than Richard and Jennifer would have to prepare for their baby." I laughed then. The irony was too perfect. My husband had left me for a younger woman to start a new life just as my own life was ending. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Will I suffer, Doctor?" Peterson reached across the desk and took my hand. "We'll manage the pain." "But Margaret, you need to tell your family. You'll need support through this." Support from whom? My husband who'd abandoned me. My children who had their own lives. My friends, who were really Richard's friends, who'd probably side with him in the divorce. "Thank you, Doctor," I said, standing up. "I'll think about the treatment." I drove home in a daze. The autumn leaves were turning gold and red. Beautiful, really. I'd always loved fall in Connecticut. Now I wondered if I'd see another one. When I got home, there was a message on the answering machine. Richard's voice asking me to sign the divorce papers. His attorney would send them over. Could I please not make this difficult? He wanted to move forward with his life. His life. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd told me he was leaving, and started to laugh. I laughed until tears ran down my face, until my sides hurt, until the laughter turned to sobs. 47 years I'd been Richard's wife. Margaret Thompson, attorney's wife, mother of 2, grandmother of 2. The woman who organized charity galas, who kept the house perfect, who made sure Richard's shirts were pressed and his dinner was ready. Now I was Margaret Thompson's soon-to-be ex-wife, cancer patient, dying woman. The phone rang again. This time, it was Elizabeth. Mom? Dad just called. He told me everything. Are you okay? Was I okay? My husband had left me for his pregnant secretary. I had a brain tumor that would kill me within a year. No, I was not okay. I'm fine, sweetie. I lied. Just processing everything. Mom, he's an idiot. Jennifer's young enough to be his daughter. It's disgusting. I'm so angry I can't believe he would do this to you. I could hear the fury in her voice. The protective instinct of a daughter defending her mother. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, to let her rage against her father and the unfairness of life, to share the burden of my diagnosis. But I couldn't. Not yet. These things happen, I said instead. Your father's having some sort of midlife crisis, I suppose. At 70? Mom, you're being too understanding. You should take him for everything he's worth. Maybe I should fight for every penny, make him pay for his betrayal. But what was the point? I'd be dead before the divorce was even final. I have to go, sweetie, I said. I have a headache. The understatement of the century. After I hung up, I walked through the house touching things as if seeing them for the first time, or perhaps the last. The wedding china we'd received as gifts. The family. Photos on the mantel. The quilt I'd made when Daniel was born. Everything held a memory. Everything told a story of a life I thought I'd understood. I stopped in front of our wedding portrait. Young Richard in his tuxedo. Young Margaret in white lace. Both of us smiling at the camera, believing in forever. Neither of us could have imagined this ending. Him running off with his secretary, me, dying alone in this house full of ghosts. That night, I made a decision I wouldn't tell anyone about the tumor. Not yet. Let Richard have his divorce, let him start his new life with Jennifer. Let the children be angry on my behalf without the added weight of grief. Let everyone think I was the abandoned wife, not the dying woman. I had maybe a year left, year to figure out who Margaret Thompson was without Richard, 1 year to live on my own terms. 1 year to write my own ending. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. My bedroom now, I felt something shift inside me. Not acceptance exactly, but something. Close to it, life had dealt me 2 devastating blows in 1 week, but I was still here. Still breathing. Still standing. Tomorrow, I would start sorting through 47 years of marriage, deciding what to keep and what to let go. Tomorrow, I would call Dr. Peterson and discuss treatment options. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of dying. But tonight, I would sleep in the middle of the bed for the first time in 47 years. I would use all the pillows, I would leave the bathroom light on if I wanted. Tonight, I would begin to learn how to be just Margaret. And maybe that would be enough. The morning light crept through the bedroom curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing between Richard's betrayal and Dr. Peterson's diagnosis. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Jennifer's young face, or the tumor on my MRI, glowing like a malevolent star in the darkness of my brain. By 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee, my usual routine now carrying the weight of everything that had changed. The divorce papers arrived by courier at 9 a.m. a thick manila envelope with Richard's law firm's logo stamped in the corner. So official, so businesslike, as if ending 47 years of marriage was just another transaction to be processed and filed. I left the envelope unopened on the kitchen counter and went to tend to my garden, something I'd neglected in the chaos of the past week. My roses were blooming late this year, deep red and pink against the October sky. I'd planted them the first spring after we moved in, Richard complaining about the expense, while I insisted they'd add value to the property. Now, as I deadheaded the spent blooms, I wondered who would care for them next year. Would Jennifer want roses, or would she tear them out to make room for a playground for their child? The thought sent a sharp pain through my chest. Or maybe it was just the tumor making itself known. Dr. Chauffeur Peterson had scheduled me for a consultation with an oncologist next week, but I hadn't decided whether to go. What was the point of chemotherapy radiation surgery if it would only buy me months of suffering? Richard had made his choice to start, fresh with a new family, and perhaps fate was giving me permission to let go. 2. My neighbor Helen appeared at the fence line, coffee mug in hand. She'd lived next door for 30 years, had watched our children grow up, had been there for every milestone and crisis. "Margaret, dear, I heard," she said, her voice gentle. "About Richard, I'm so sorry." News traveled fast in our small community. I forced a smile. "These things happen." "After 47 years? No, they don't." Helen shook her head. "That man's lost his mind. And with his secretary of all people, it's such a cliché." I continued pruning the roses, letting Helen's indignation wash over me. She meant well, but her anger on my behalf felt hollow. What did it matter if Richard's affair was a cliché when the result was the same? My life as I knew it was over. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" Helen asked. "You need to protect yourself financially." I thought of the tumor growing silently in my brain, of the months I had left, of the futility of fighting for money I wouldn't live to spend. "Richard's handling everything," I said. "He's being generous." Helen snorted. "Generous? He owes you half of everything, including his pension. Don't let him buy you off with guilt money." But guilt money was all I had left. Richard's conscience was the only leverage I possessed, and even that seemed a weak currency compared to Jennifer's youth and fertility. I changed the subject, asking about Helen's grandchildren, letting her pride fill the space between us until she finally went back inside. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the attic. The narrow stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed past decades of accumulated memories. Christmas decorations, baby clothes, old furniture we couldn't bear to part with. In the far corner under a dusty sheet, I found what I was looking for: my old writing desk. Before Richard, before children, before my life became about supporting others, I'd wanted to be a writer. I'd filled notebooks with stories, poems, observations about life. Now, as I lifted the desk's lid, I found those notebooks exactly where I'd left them 35 years ago. Their pages had yellowed, but the words remained my younger self, speaking across time, about dreams and hopes that had long since faded. I carried the desk downstairs piece by piece, reassembling it in the spare bedroom that had once been Elizabeth's. The room faced east, catching the morning sun, and I could see my garden from the window. If I was going to die, I decided I would spend my remaining time writing, not for publication, not for anyone else, but for myself, to make sense of my life before it ended. The first words came slowly, my hand cramping around the pen. I wrote about meeting Richard at a college mixer, how he'd asked me to dance to Moon River, how I'd known even then that he would want me to follow, not lead. I wrote about our wedding day, the nervous flutter in my stomach as I walked down the aisle, the way his hand had trembled as he slipped the ring on my finger. I wrote about Daniel's birth, 36 hours of labor. Richard pacing the waiting room while I screamed and pushed our son into the world. I wrote about Elizabeth's first steps, Daniel's baseball games family, Vacations to the Cape, where we'd rent the same cottage every summer until the kids declared themselves too old for family trips. The words poured out faster. Now, filling page after page, I wrote about the slow drift that happens in long marriages. How passion cools into companionship. How companionship can harden into habit. I wrote about the first time I suspected Richard was unfaithful years ago, with a client who'd called the house too often. How I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Wrote until my hand ached and the sun had set. When I finally looked up, hours had passed. The house was dark except for the lamp on my desk. I'd missed dinner. Not that I had much appetite these days. The headaches were getting worse, and sometimes the room would spin without warning, making me grab for the nearest wall. The phone rang, startling me in the quiet house. It was Daniel, Mom. I just got off the phone with Dad. What the hell is going on? Unlike Elizabeth's protective anger, Daniel's voice held confusion and hurt. He'd always been closer to Richard, had followed him into law, had modeled his life after his father's. The betrayal hit him differently. Your father's made his choice, I said carefully. He wants to start over with someone else. But why? You guys seemed fine at Christmas. At my birthday dinner. You've been married forever. I almost laughed. How many times had Richard and I promised each other forever? Now forever had an expiration date for both of us, though. Only I knew the full truth. Sometimes people change, Daniel. Sometimes they want different things. But he's 70 years old. And Jennifer's what, 35? It's embarrassing. I could hear his wife Sarah murmuring in the background, probably trying to calm him. Down they'd been married 8 years. Had twin boys who called me Grandma Maggie. Would they remember me when I was gone? Have you seen him? I asked. Talked to him in person? Daniel sighed. He came by the office yesterday, tried to explain. Said he'd fallen in love, that he deserved to be happy, Mom. He's talking about having another kid at his age. The confirmation hit me harder than I expected. Richard really was starting over completely. Building a new family, as if ours had been just a rough draft. Are you okay, Mom? Really okay. Sarah and I can fly out this weekend. No, I'm fine. I lied smoothly, a skill I'd perfected over decades of marriage. You have work, the boys have school, I'm adjusting. After I hung up, I went to the bathroom and studied my reflection in the mirror. When had my hair gone completely gray? When had these lines appeared around my eyes and mouth? I looked old, tired, worn out. No wonder Richard had chosen Jennifer with her smooth skin and bright eyes, her whole life ahead of her. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted. I wasn't just old, I was experienced. I had lived. I had loved. I had raised children. I had stories to tell. And I had maybe a year to tell them. The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose. I called Dr. Peterson's office and confirmed my appointment with the oncologist. I would hear what they had to say about treatment, consider my options. But I wouldn't let cancer or Richard define my remaining time. I spent the day writing, filling notebook after notebook with memories, observations, truths I'd never spoken aloud. I wrote about the loneliness of being a corporate wife, always the +1, never the main event. I wrote about the dreams I'd abandoned, the person I might have been if I'd chosen differently. By evening, my head was pounding and my vision had started to blur, but I pushed through, determined to get the words down while I still could. I was writing about our 25th anniversary party, how Richard had given a speech about partnership and commitment when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But the bell rang again. Insistent. When I opened the door, Richard stood there, looking older than I remembered. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose. He held a bouquet of roses. My favorite kind, the ones I'd planted in our garden. Margaret, he said. Can I come in? Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. But 47 years of habit are hard to break. I stepped aside, letting him enter the house he'd walked out of just days ago. He stood in the foyer looking around as if seeing it for the first time. The place looks the same. It's only been a week, Richard. He had the grace to look ashamed. I know I just meant. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come. Then why did you? He held out the roses awkwardly. I wanted to see you to explain. You already explained you're leaving me for your pregnant secretary. What more is there to say? He flinched at my words. It's not that simple, isn't it? We stood there in silence, the grandfather clock ticking loudly in the background. Finally, I took the roses and walked to the kitchen to find a vase. He followed me like a lost puppy. The kids are angry with me, he said as I arranged the flowers. Daniel won't return my calls. Elizabeth told me I'm not welcome at Thanksgiving. What did you expect, Richard? A party? He sat down at the kitchen table in his usual chair. I didn't expect it to be this hard. I almost laughed. The selfishness of it. The sheer audacity. He had blown up our life, and now he was complaining about the fallout. Margaret. I know I've hurt you, he continued. But I need you to understand I never meant for this to happen, Jennifer and I. Stop. I held up my hand. I don't want to hear about Jennifer. I don't want to hear about your great love story. I just want to know one thing. He looked at me, waiting. Was any of it real? Our marriage, our family? Did you ever really love me? His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the young man I'd married, the one who'd held my hand through labor, who'd danced with me at our children's weddings. Of course I loved you, I still do in a way. But Margaret, we've been going through the motions for years. You must have felt it too. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd known deep down that we'd become more roommates than lovers, but I'd thought that was normal. That passion always faded into comfortable companionship. I'd thought we were growing. Old together, not growing apart. I have cancer, I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could stop them. Richard's face went white. What? A brain tumor, glioblastoma, stage 4. I found out the day after you left. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. How long? What did the doctors say? A year, maybe less. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Margaret, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Would it have mattered? Would you have stayed if you'd known? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had once worn a wedding ring. I don't know, he admitted finally, and that was answer enough. You should go, I said, standing up. Jennifer's probably wondering where you are. He stood slowly, looking older than his 70 years. What can I do? How can I help? Sign the divorce papers quickly. I don't have time for a drawn-out legal battle. Margaret, please, let me help financially with treatment. Anything you need. I almost told him that money couldn't buy time, that all his wealth couldn't add a single day to my life. But I just nodded. Your lawyer can handle the details. At the door, he turned back one last time. I did love you, Margaret. I want you to know that. I know, I said, and I did. But love wasn't always enough. After he left, I sat at my writing desk and picked up my pen. There was so much more to write, so many stories to tell, and now I had a new chapter to add. The chapter where I learned that endings and beginnings sometimes arrive together wrapped in pain and possibility. I wrote until my hand cramped and my vision blurred, until the headache forced me to stop. But for the first time since Richard's announcement, since Dr. Peterson's diagnosis, I felt something other than despair. I felt free. The oncologist's office smelled of antiseptic and false hope. Dr. Sarah Chen was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes that had probably delivered too much bad news. She pulled up my MRI scans on her computer screen, the tumor glowing white against the gray matter of my brain. Mrs. Thompson, the tumor is approximately 4 centimeters located in the right temporal lobe, she explained, pointing to the screen. Given its size and location, surgery isn't recommended. The risks outweigh the potential benefits. I nodded, having already suspected this. So what are my options? Chemotherapy and radiation can slow the growth, possibly extend your life by several months. But I want to be clear, this is palliative care, not curative. The side effects can be severe. Nausea, hair loss, extreme, fatigue, cognitive issues. I thought about spending my remaining time in hospitals hooked up to IV drips, too sick to write, too weak to tend my garden. And without treatment, Dr. Chen's voice softened. 3 to 6 months, the tumor will continue to grow. You'll experience increased headaches, seizures, vision problems. Eventually, you'll lose consciousness. Will I be in pain? We can manage the pain with medication. Keep you comfortable. Comfortable. What a strange word for dying. I looked at the scan again. This thing inside my head that would kill me, it seemed so small to cause so much damage. I need time to think. I said, Doctor. Chen nodded. Of course. Take a few days. But Mrs. Thompson, the sooner we start treatment, the better chance we have of buying you time. Time. Everyone kept talking about time as if it were a commodity to be purchased. But what good was time if I couldn't live it on my terms? I left the office and drove not home, but to the cemetery where my parents were buried. The oak trees had turned golden, their leaves falling like tears onto the graves. I sat on the bench near their headstones and tried to imagine my own Margaret Thompson, beloved wife and mother, but I wasn't a wife anymore. And soon I wouldn't be anything. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. Mom, call me when you can. Dad's being impossible about Thanksgiving. I almost laughed. Thanksgiving was 6 weeks away. I might not even make it that far. But my children didn't know that. They were still caught up in the drama of their father's midlife crisis, not realizing their mother was facing a much more permanent departure. That evening I sat at my writing desk and made a list, pros and cons of treatment. On the pro side, more time to say goodbye, to put my affairs in order to watch my garden bloom one more spring. On the con side, hospitals, needles, sickness, the gradual loss of myself. Was still weighing options when the doorbell rang. Helen stood on my porch holding a casserole dish. I made too much lasagna, she said, which was code for, I'm worried about you. I let her in, and we sat at the kitchen table while she chattered about neighborhood gossip, Mr. Peterson's new dog, the Hartley's renovation plans. She carefully avoided mentioning Richard until finally she couldn't help herself. I saw her today, Jennifer at the grocery store, buying prenatal vitamins. Helen shook her head. She looks like a child herself. I thought about Richard shopping for baby supplies at his age. The man who'd complained about changing diapers when our children were born, now preparing to do it all again. Margaret, you're taking this too well, Helen said suddenly. You should be angry, furious. You should take him for everything. I am angry, I admitted, but not about the money. Then what? How could I explain that my anger wasn't about Richard's betrayal, but about the cosmic injustice of it all he got to? Start over, have another child live, perhaps another 20 years. While I face death alone, my body betraying me just as surely as my husband had. I'm tired, Helen, I said, which wasn't a lie. She left reluctantly, making me promise to call if I needed anything. After she was gone, I opened the envelope of divorce papers and began to read. Richard was being generous as promised. The house was mine, along with half our savings investments and his pension. He'd continue paying all household expenses and medical medical insurance. I almost laughed. I signed where indicated, each signature feeling like a small death. Margaret Thompson. Soon to be Margaret Shaw again. The name I'd been before. Richard before marriage, before cancer. That night, I dreamed of Jennifer young and glowing with new life while I withered away like my autumn roses. When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears and my head felt like it might explode. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen. I've decided against treatment, I said. There was a pause. Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is difficult, but… No, you don't understand. I interrupted something I rarely did. I don't want to spend my last months in hospitals. I want to live. Whatever time I have left on my terms, another pause. I respect your decision. We'll focus on pain management, quality of life. I'll refer you to our palliative care team. After hanging up, I felt lighter, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't recognized. The decision was made. Now I could focus on what mattered. I spent the next week putting my affairs in order. I met with my lawyer, updated my will, left everything to Daniel and Elizabeth with a small trust for my grandchildren. I arranged for someone to manage the house after I was gone, pay bills, maintain the garden. I also started planning my funeral, choosing readings, music, the dress I wanted to be buried. I wrote letters to my children to be delivered after my death, telling them things I'd never said aloud. How proud I was of them, how much I loved them, how they should forgive their father, not for his sake, but for their own. The headaches grew, worse, and sometimes I'd lose my balance or forget simple words. But I kept writing, filling notebook after notebook with memories and observations. I wrote about the early years of marriage when Richard and I couldn't keep our hands off each other, about the middle years when we were so busy with children and careers, we barely saw each other, about the later years when we'd settled into a routine that now seemed more like a rut. One afternoon, while writing about our honeymoon in Paris, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Richard's BMW. He got out looking older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped. I met him at the door. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "I got the divorce papers," he said. "You signed them. Wasn't that what you wanted?" He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Yes, but Margaret, you didn't ask for anything extra. No alimony beyond what I offered, no fight over assets, nothing." "I don't need a fight, Richard. I need peace." He looked at me. Really looked. For the first time since he'd announced he was leaving. "You've lost weight. Cancer will do that." He flinched. "Have you started treatment?" "No, and I'm not going to." His face crumpled. "Margaret, you can't just give up." "I'm not giving up, I'm choosing how to spend my remaining time, and it's not in hospitals." We stood there in awkward silence until finally he said, "Jennifer doesn't know about your diagnosis." "Good. Keep it that way. I don't want her pity or yours." "It's not pity, Margaret. I still care about you. Just not enough to stay." The words hung between us, sharp and final. He looked away. "I should go," he said. "But if you need anything, I'll call my children." After he left, I went back to my writing, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself thinking about Jennifer, wondering what she saw in Richard besides money and status. Did she love him, or was she just securing her future? The next day, I did something impulsive. I drove to Richard's office building and waited in my car until lunchtime. Sure enough, Jennifer emerged young, pretty visibly pregnant. She was laughing with another woman, her hand resting on her small belly. I followed them to a nearby cafe and took a table where I could observe without being seen. Jennifer ordered a salad and decaf coffee, the picture of health and vitality. Everything I wasn't. As I watched her, I felt not anger, but a strange sort of pity. She had no idea what she was getting into. Richard would be 71 when their child was born, 89 when the child graduated high school. Would he have the energy for midnight feedings, soccer games, teenage drama? Or would Jennifer find herself like me, sacrificing her dreams to support his career, raising their child largely alone while he worked late and traveled for business? Would she wake up one day, 47 years from now, and realize she'd lost herself in the process? I left before they finished lunch, driving home with tears in my eyes. Not for myself, but for the girl I'd been, the one who'd walked down the aisle full of hope and dreams, the one who'd believed love conquered all that evening. Elizabeth called. Mom, I'm coming home this weekend. Honey, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Dad told me. My heart sank. Told you what? About the cancer. Why didn't you tell us? I closed my eyes, feeling betrayed all over again. I didn't want to worry you. Worry us? Mom, you're dying and you didn't think we should know? I was going to tell you I just needed time. Time for what? To die alone? Her voice broke and I heard her crying. Something twisted in my chest. Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm coming home Friday. Daniel, too, would need to talk about treatment options. There aren't any options, Elizabeth. I've decided not to pursue treatment. Silence, then. You can't be serious. I am. I don't want to spend my last month sick from chemo. I want to live. This is insane, Mom. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe the tumor was affecting my judgment. But for the first time in my life, I was making decisions for myself. Not for Richard, not for the children, not for anyone else. I love you, Elizabeth. But this is my choice. She argued for another 20 minutes, but eventually conceded she and Daniel would come home that weekend, and we'd talk. After hanging up, I went to my garden. The roses were almost done for the season, their petals falling like snow. I gathered the best blooms and brought them inside, arranging them in vases throughout the house. If I was going to die, I would surround myself with beauty. That night, I wrote letters to my grandchildren for their future birthdays, graduations, weddings. I wouldn't be there to celebrate, but my words would be, I told them about their grandfather and me. Not the ending, but the beginning. The love story before it soured. The dreams we'd shared before they diverged. I wrote, until my hand cramped and my vision blurred until the headache forced me to stop. But even through the pain, I felt a sense of purpose. I was writing my own ending and, unlike Richard, I wouldn't run from it. Friday morning arrived with unexpected rain, the gray sky matching my mood as I prepared for my children's visit. I'd spent days cleaning the house as if tidiness could somehow soften the blow of my diagnosis. Fresh flowers in every room, their grandmother's china set out for dinner, the photo albums I knew they'd want to see arranged on the coffee table. Daniel arrived first, looking so much like his father. It made my heart ache. Same strong jaw, same worried, furrow between his brows. He hugged me tighter than usual, holding on as if I might disappear. Mom, you look, he started, then stopped. Terrible. I know. I finished for him. I was going to say thin. Elizabeth came an hour later, still in her hospital scrubs, having driven straight from her shift. She took one look at me and burst into tears. Oh, Mom, she sobbed. Into my shoulder. We sat in the living room, the rain pattering against the windows while I explained my decision. They argued as I knew they would, Elizabeth with medical facts and statistics, Daniel with legal precision about power of attorney and living wills. There are clinical trials, Elizabeth insisted, new treatments, immunotherapy, and spend my last months as a guinea pig? I shook my head. No. But Mom, Daniel leaned forward. What about us? What about your grandchildren? What about me? I asked quietly. For once in my life, I'm choosing what I want. They exchanged glances the way they used to as children when they thought I was being unreasonable. Is this about Dad? Elizabeth asked. Are you punishing him by refusing treatment? The question startled me. No, this has nothing to do with your father, really, because the timing seems suspicious. He leaves and suddenly you're giving up. I'm not giving up. I'm choosing quality over quantity. I reached for their hands. I want to spend my remaining time living, not dying in a hospital. We talked for hours, covering everything from funeral arrangements to favorite memories. They cried, I cried, we laughed at old stories and family jokes. By evening, we'd reached an uneasy truce. They didn't agree with my decision, but they'd respect it. That night, after they'd gone to bed in their childhood rooms, I sat at my writing desk and opened a fresh notebook, Dear Richard. I wrote, then crossed it out, started again. To the man I thought. I knew. Still wrong. I crumpled the page. Finally, I just began writing whatever came to mind. Years ago, I promised to love you in sickness and in health. I kept that promise through your ulcer, your back surgery, your midlife crisis at 45 when you bought that ridiculous sports car. I supported your career, moves, your long hours, your ambitions, even when they meant less time for our family. I gave up my writing to raise our children. I hosted dinner parties for partners. I barely knew, smiled, at jokes that weren't funny, pretended not to notice when your secretary called too often. I thought we were building something together. A life. A legacy. Instead, you were just biding time until something better came along. The irony is that I'm dying, just as you're starting over. You get a new beginning while I get an ending. But maybe that's fitting. You always were better at beginnings than endings. Remember our first date? You brought me daisies because you'd overheard me tell someone they were my favorite flower. You paid attention then. When did you stop paying attention? I won't pretend I was perfect. I let myself disappear into the role of your wife, forgot who I was before. Maybe if I'd fought harder for myself for my dreams, we wouldn't have ended up here. But we did end up here. You with your pregnant girlfriend, me with my tumor. Both of us facing mortality in different ways. I don't hate you, Richard. I'm too tired for hate, but I am disappointed. Not just in you, but in myself. For not seeing sooner that love shouldn't require losing yourself. I hope Jennifer makes you happy. I hope your new child brings you joy. I hope you're a better father this time around, more present, more engaged. As for me, I'm using my remaining time to find the woman I lost along the way, the writer, the dreamer, the girl who believed in forever. Forever turned out to be shorter than expected. I stopped writing, my hand-cramping tears blurring the words. Tomorrow I would tear up this letter like all the others I'd written to Richard, but tonight it felt good to put the words on paper to acknowledge the grief and anger and betrayal. Next morning, Elizabeth made pancakes while Daniel handled calls from concerned relatives who'd heard the news through the family grapevine. We spent the day going through old photos, me telling stories about their childhood they'd never heard. Remember this? I held up a picture of Richard teaching Daniel to ride a bike. Daniel smiled. I fell so many times, Dad was so patient. He was different then. I said, we both were. Do you regret it, Mom? Elizabeth asked. Marrying Dad, having us? Never regret. You too? I reached for their hands. You're the best things that ever happened to me. That afternoon we walked through my garden, the rain having cleared. I showed them which roses needed winter protection, which perennials would return in spring. I've arranged for a gardener. I said, to keep things going after. Mom, don't. Daniel's voice cracked. We have to talk about these things. I insisted, I want to make this easier for you. We discussed practical matters. My will, my wishes for memorial donations. The music I wanted at my funeral. It was surreal planning my own ending, but also strangely liberating. Sunday morning, they prepared to leave, both reluctant to go. We'll come back next weekend, Elizabeth promised. And I'll handle all the legal stuff. Daniel added, power of attorney, healthcare, proxy, everything. I hugged them both, breathing in their familiar scents. My babies now grown with lives of their own. After they left, the house felt emptier than ever. I wandered from room to room, touching objects that held memories. Our wedding album, Richard's golf trophies, the children's artwork I'd saved, on impulse. I began boxing things up. Richard's clothes, his books, anything that still carried his presence. I didn't want reminders of our life, together. Not now. I wanted to fill the house with my own energy. my own choices. I converted his study into an art studio, though I hadn't painted in decades. I bought new canvases, oils, watercolors. If I was going to die, I would die creating something. The headaches worsened that week. Sometimes my vision would blur or I'd forget common words. Chen prescribed stronger pain medication and referred me to hospice care. "It's not time yet," I protested. "It's better to have support in place," she explained. "They can help manage your symptoms, keep you comfortable at home." Home where Richard had promised to grow old with me, where we'd raised our children, where I would now die alone. The hospice nurse arrived. Tuesday morning, a gentle woman named Maria who reminded me of my grandmother. She checked my vitals, discussed pain management, explained what to expect as the tumor progressed. "Many patients find comfort in spiritual practices," she suggested. "Prayer meditation, whatever brings you peace." I thought about the faith I'd neglected for years. Sunday services attended more for appearances than devotion prayers recited by rote. Now facing death, I wondered what I believed. That night I lit a candle and sat in silence, not praying exactly, but opening myself to whatever might be listening. I felt no divine presence, no sudden revelation, just a quiet acceptance. The next morning, Richard called. "The divorce is finalized," he said. "Papers should arrive today." "Congratulations," I replied, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. "Margaret, please, I want to help. Let me pay for the best doctors. Treatments." "Your money can't fix this, Richard." "Then what can I do?" I thought about it. "You can live your life. Be happy with Jennifer, raise your child well, and remember that I existed." Silence, then. "I'll always remember you, Margaret." "Will you?" I wondered. "Or will I become a story you tell at dinner parties, the first wife who died conveniently making way for your second chance?" That's not fair. None of this is fair. Richard, after hanging up, I went to my studio and began painting abstract. Swirls of color expressing emotions I couldn't put into words. Anger, grief, acceptance, hope, all bleeding together on canvas. Days blurred. Pain medication made me drowsy. Hospice visits increased. I spent hours in my garden watching autumn deepen writing. When my hands were steady enough painting, when they weren't, one afternoon, Jennifer appeared at my door. She stood on my porch, visibly pregnant, twisting her hands nervously. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry to just show up." I studied her saw. Not the homewrecker I'd imagined, but a scared young woman. "It's Ms. Shaw now," I said. "Come in?" We sat in the kitchen, awkward silence stretching between us. "Richard doesn't know I'm here," she finally said. "Why are you here?" She took a deep breath. "To apologize? To ask forgiveness? To understand?" "Understand what? How you can be so calm? I'd be furious if someone stole my husband." I almost laughed. "You didn't steal him, Jennifer. He chose to leave. But after 47 years?" "Yes, after 47 years." I poured us both tea, my hands trembling slightly. "Tell me, do you love him?" She looked startled. "Yes." "Why?" She struggled to answer. "He's successful, intelligent, charming. Those are attributes, not reasons. He makes me feel safe." She admitted, "Secure." I nodded, understanding. I felt that way too once, but security isn't love, Jennifer, and charm fades. "You must hate me." I considered this. "No, I pity you." Her eyes widened. "Pity. You're 35, starting a family with a man twice your age who's already proven he can walk away from commitments. He won't leave me." That's what I thought too. Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't know about your cancer." "Not at first. Would it have mattered?" She touched her belly protectively. "I don't know." We sat in silence until finally she asked, "Do you have any advice?" I thought about all the things I wished someone had told me at her age, about maintaining your identity in marriage, about not losing yourself in someone else's dreams. Don't give up. Your career? I said finally. Keep something that's yours alone, and don't wait 47 years to discover who you are. After she left, I felt strangely lighter. Meeting Jennifer had humanized her, made her real instead of the abstract threat she'd been. That evening I wrote in my journal. Today I met my replacement. She's younger, prettier, full of hope. I should hate her, but I don't. She's just another woman trying to find her way. I wonder if someday she'll sit where I'm sitting, wondering where her life went. I hope not. I hope she's smarter than I was. I hope she keeps part of herself separate, untouchable. But if she doesn't, if she loses herself the way I did, I hope she finds her way back sooner. I hope she doesn't wait until she's dying to live. The tumor grew. The headaches intensified. Vision problems worsened. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. But I kept writing, painting, creating, racing against time to leave something behind. Evidence that I existed, that I mattered, that I was more than just Richard's wife. Winter approached. The last of my roses fell. I knew I wouldn't see them bloom again, but I'd made peace with that. I was writing my own ending now. And for the first time in 47 years, I was the author of my own story. November came with early snow, delicate flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. I watched from my bedroom window as the world turned white, thinking how appropriate it was. Everything clean and pristine, like a blank page waiting to be written. The seizures started the week before Thanksgiving. The first one hit while I was making tea, sending me crashing to the kitchen floor. When I came to, Maria was there, having used her key when I didn't answer her knock. "We need to increase your medication," she said gently, helping me to the couch. "And maybe consider having someone stay with you." "No," I said firmly. "I want to be alone." But being alone was becoming dangerous. The next seizure happened in the shower. I woke up on the bathroom floor, water still running, a gash on my forehead where I'd hit the tile. Daniel and Elizabeth took turns staying with me after that, though I protested. They set up a schedule, working remotely when possible, hiring a night nurse when they couldn't be there. "Mom, please," Elizabeth begged. "Let us help," I conceded, too tired to fight. The tumor was winning, stealing pieces of me day by day. Sometimes I'd forget words mid-sentence. Other times I'd find myself in a room with no memory of why I'd gone there. But I kept writing. Even when my handwriting became shaky, when I had to dictate to Elizabeth because I couldn't hold a pen, I kept telling my story. Thanksgiving arrived, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Richard stood at my door, holding a pumpkin pie. "The kids invited me," he said awkwardly. "If you'd rather I leave." I studied him. He looked older, tired, the confident attorney replaced by an uncertain man carrying dessert like a peace offering. "Come in," I said. Dinner was surreal. Richard at one end of the table, me at the other, our children between us like buffers. Elizabeth had cooked turkey, stuffing, all the traditional dishes. Daniel carved, taking his father's usual role. We made small talk about safe topics, the weather, the kids' work, my grandchildren's latest achievements. No one mentioned Jennifer or the baby or my cancer. After dinner, while the kids cleaned up, Richard and I sat in the living room. The silence stretched until he finally spoke. "I made a mistake," he said. I waited. "Not leaving you," he clarified quickly. "But how I did it. The timing. Everything." "Would you have stayed if you'd known about the cancer?" He looked at his hands. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Out of duty? Out of love," he said softly. The kind that might have been buried but was still there. I felt tears threaten but blinked them back. "It's too late for regrets, Richard." "I know." He reached for my hand and I let him take it. Jennifer lost the baby. The news hit me harder than expected. Despite everything, I'd never wished her harm. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. She's devastated. Blames herself. Thinks it's karma. It's not karma. It's biology. These things happen. He nodded. She's young. There will be other chances. And you? Do you want other chances? He looked at me then. Really looked. What I want doesn't matter anymore. After he left, I sat alone in the dark living room. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking time I didn't have. I thought about paths not taken, choices made and unmade, the strange ways life circles back on itself. December brought worse symptoms: double vision, memory lapses, moments of confusion where I didn't recognize my own children. Dr. Chen adjusted my medications, but there was only so much they could do. "We're entering the final stage," she told Elizabeth and Daniel during what would be my last office visit. Weeks, not months. I heard them crying in the hallway afterward, trying to muffle their sobs, but I felt strangely calm. Death was no longer an abstract concept, but a companion walking beside me, patient and inevitable. I stopped painting. My hands shook too much. But I kept dictating stories, memories, letters to leave behind. Elizabeth recorded everything on her phone, promising to transcribe it all later. One morning, I woke to find Helen sitting by my bed. "The kids let me in," she said. "Thought you might like some company." We talked about nothing important: neighborhood gossip, her grandchildren, the new family that had moved into the Hendersons' old house. Normal conversation that felt like a gift. "I'll miss you," she said as she left. "I'll miss you too," I replied, knowing it was true. Richard came by regularly now, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. We didn't talk about the past or the future, just sat together in comfortable silence. Once he read to me from my old notebooks, stories I'd written in college. "You were talented," he said. "You should have kept writing." "I did," I reminded him. "Just not for publication." Christmas approached, though I knew I wouldn't make it that far. The children decorated the house anyway, hanging lights and wreaths, playing carols. They brought my grandchildren to visit, their laughter filling the house with life even as mine ebbed away. On December 15th, I had my last coherent day. I woke clear-headed. The fog that had clouded my mind temporarily lifted. I knew it wouldn't last. That this was my brain's final gift. I called my children to my bedside. "I need you to promise me something," I said. They leaned in, holding my hands. "Live fully. Don't wait for someday. Don't lose yourselves in other people's dreams." They nodded, tears streaming. "And forgive your father. Not for him. For you." Elizabeth protested, but I squeezed her hand. "Anger is heavy. Don't carry it." That afternoon, I asked Maria to help me to the garden one last time. Snow covered everything, but I could still see the shapes of my rose bushes, dormant but alive. "Beneath their white blankets, they'll bloom again," Maria said. "Yes," I agreed. "They will." Richard arrived as the sun was setting. He found me in bed, too weak to sit up but still aware. "Margaret," he said, his voice breaking. "Sit with me," I whispered. He took my hand, and we watched the light fade from the sky. No words were needed. 47 years of history hung between us. Love and betrayal, joy and disappointment, a life shared and then severed. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know. I did love you. I know that too." As darkness fell, I felt myself drifting, not into sleep, but something deeper. Richard's hand anchored me to the moment, to this room, to the life I was leaving. "Thank you," I managed to say. "For what?" "For the beginning. For our children. For the good years." He bent and kissed my forehead, his tears falling on my skin. "Goodbye, Margaret." But I was already gone. floating somewhere between memory and dream. I saw myself young again, dancing with Richard at our wedding. Saw our children being born, taking first steps, graduating, getting married. Saw the garden in full bloom, roses, climbing the trellis. And then I saw something else. Myself, alone but not lonely. Writing at my desk, painting in sunlight, living fully in moments that belonged only to me. The last thing I heard was Elizabeth's voice, reading from my notebooks. I'm more than wife, more than mother. I am Margaret. I exist. I matter. I am the author of my own story. Then silence. Sweet, perfect silence. The funeral was held on December 20th. Snow fell softly as they lowered my casket into the ground. Richard stood with our children, Jennifer notably absent. Friends and neighbors gathered, sharing stories about the quiet woman who'd lived among them. Helen spoke about my roses, Daniel about my strength. Elizabeth read from my writings, my voice living on through her words. Afterward, they gathered at the house, my house, sorting through belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate. In my studio, they found the paintings I'd done in my final months. Abstract swirls of color that somehow captured everything. I couldn't say. Richard took one, a canvas of deep blues and purples with a single streak of gold. "It looks like hope," he said. They found my final letter on my desk, sealed in an envelope marked "to be opened after." Inside, my last words. "Don't mourn too long. I lived, I loved, I learned. In the end, I found myself." That's more than many can say. Plant new roses in the garden. Watch them bloom. Remember that life continues, beautiful and resilient. And know, this, I forgive, everything, everyone, especially myself. With love, Margaret. Spring came, as it always does. The roses bloomed, blood red against green leaves. A new family moved into the house, a young couple with dreams of their own. Sometimes Richard visited the cemetery, bringing daisies, my favorite flower. He'd sit by my grave and talk about his life, his regrets, his attempts to do better. Jennifer left him 3 months after I died. She'd realized, perhaps too late, that security wasn't love, that charm did fade, that some spaces couldn't be filled by someone new. The children thrived, carrying my last wishes in their hearts. They lived fully, loved deeply, never losing themselves in others' expectations. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, I watched. Not with sadness or regret, but with peace. I had written my ending, had chosen how to leave this world, on my terms, in my time. As myself, Margaret Shaw Thompson, writer, dreamer, rose gardener, author of her own story, until the very last page. The months after my death brought revelations that would shake my family to its core. Elizabeth, while going through my papers to settle the estate, discovered a manila envelope tucked in the back of my desk drawer. Inside were documents I'd never shared, medical records dating back 2 years before my diagnosis. "Mom knew," Elizabeth told Daniel over the phone, her voice trembling. She knew something was wrong long before Dad left. The records showed complaints of persistent headaches, vision problems, dizzy spells. Test results that suggested further screening, appointments made and canceled, a pattern of avoidance that suddenly made sense. "Why didn't she tell anyone?" Daniel asked when they met at the house to discuss their discovery. Elizabeth held up a journal entry dated 18 months. "Before my death, saw Dr. Peterson today. He wants to run more tests. Mentioned the possibility of a tumor. But Richard has the Henderson case, and the kids are so busy with their lives. Maybe I'm imagining things. The headaches could be stress. I'll wait until after the holidays." They found more entries, a chronicle of denial and delay. Canceled the MRI appointment. Richard's firm is celebrating their biggest win. Can't cast a shadow on his moment. The dizzy spells are worse, but Elizabeth just got her dream residency. She doesn't need this worry. Perhaps if I ignore it, it will go away. Silly, I know. But I can't bear to burden anyone. The truth hit them hard. Their mother had suspected her illness long before their father's betrayal, had chosen silence to protect everyone but herself. Richard learned about the journals when the children confronted him. He sat in his apartment, the one he'd shared, briefly with Jennifer, reading excerpts Elizabeth had copied. She knew I was unhappy, he said, voice hollow. She was trying to give me space to figure things out. Another entry, from 6 months before he left. Richard seems distant. More than usual. He's staying late at the office, and when he's home, he's not really here. I should talk to him, but my head hurts so much these days. Maybe after I see the neurologist. But she never made it to that appointment. Richard announced his affair first. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. While Margaret had been hiding her illness to avoid burdening her family, Richard had been planning his escape. 2 secrets growing in the same house, feeding off each other's silence. Jennifer reached out to Elizabeth a month after the funeral. They met at a coffee shop, 2 women connected by the man who'd failed them both. I found something, Jennifer said, sliding a letter across the table. In Richard's things, when I was moving out. It was a letter from Margaret to Richard, dated a week before she died but never sent. Dear Richard, I've started this letter 100 times. Each version feels wrong, but time is running out, and there are things I need to say. I knew about Jennifer before you told me. The late nights, the new cologne, the way you'd smile at your phone. I recognized the signs because I'd seen them before, years ago, with others. Yes, I knew about them too. I stayed because I loved you, because I believed in our family, because I thought that's what wives did. But also because I was afraid. Afraid of being alone, of starting over, of admitting failure. The tumor gave me clarity. Facing death strips away pretense. I realized I'd been dying long before the cancer, dying inside, piece by piece, as I molded myself to fit your life. I don't blame you entirely. I chose this path. I chose to be the supportive wife, to put my dreams aside, to find fulfillment through your success. But I blame you for not seeing me, really seeing me, for so many years. When you left, it hurt, but it also freed me. For the first time in decades, I was just Margaret. Not your wife, not the mother of your children, just me. The cancer took my future, but you gave me back myself. I want you to know I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And I want you to forgive yourself. The guilt you carry won't honor my memory. Living better will. Be good to Jennifer. She's young and hopeful, the way I once was. Don't let her lose herself the way I did. And if this relationship fails, as I suspect it might, learn from it. Learn that love isn't possession, that marriage isn't ownership, that 2 whole people make a stronger union than 2 halves. I'm leaving you my rose garden journal. Not for you to tend the roses. I know you never cared for gardening. But to understand what they meant to me. Each entry is dated. Read them. See how I poured my creativity into those flowers when I couldn't write my stories. Understand that beauty finds a way to grow, even in constrained spaces. Goodbye, Richard. Thank you for our children, for the good years, for the lessons learned too late. I hope your new beginning brings you happiness. I hope you learn to see the woman beside you, whoever she may be. With more love than you knew, Margaret. Jennifer wiped her eyes. I think she meant for you to find this. Elizabeth read it twice, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. Why are you showing me this? Because I need you to know I never meant to hurt her. And because... Jennifer hesitated. Because I'm pregnant. Again. The news landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading. Does my father know? Jennifer shook her head. We're not together. Haven't been since your mother's funeral. This baby is someone else's, someone my own age, someone who sees me. Elizabeth laughed, surprising herself. She would have appreciated that irony. They talked for hours, two women finding unexpected connection in shared loss. Jennifer learned about the Margaret she'd never known, the writer, the dreamer, the woman who'd found herself too late. Elizabeth learned about her father's grief, his late-night confessions to Jennifer about roads not taken, choices regretted. Meanwhile, Richard was making his own discoveries. In the attic, he found boxes of manuscripts, stories Margaret had written, over the years, hidden away like guilty secrets. Romance novels, mysteries, literary fiction, hundreds of pages filled with voices he'd never heard her use. One manuscript was titled The Garden of Second Chances. He read it in one sitting, recognizing himself in the distant husband, Margaret in the protagonist who finds renewal through cultivating beauty. The dedication page read, To the woman I might have been, and the one I still could be. Daniel. Found him there hours later, surrounded by papers, tears on his face. I never knew, Richard kept repeating. I never knew she could write like this. None of us did, Daniel said. She hid so much of herself. No, Richard corrected. She showed us. We just didn't look. The children decided to publish Margaret's work posthumously. A small press, interested in the unusual story behind the manuscripts, offered a contract. The first book, The Garden of Second Chances, came out a year after her death. The dedication was changed to, For Margaret Shaw Thompson, who found herself in time to teach us all. The book signing was held at the local bookstore. Richard attended, sitting in the back row as Elizabeth read excerpts. The prose was luminous, full of insight about marriage, identity, and the courage to bloom where you're planted. Afterward, a woman approached Richard. I knew your wife, she said. We were in a writing group together years ago, before she quit to focus on your career. Richard stared. A writing group? Every Thursday morning, she was the most talented among us. We begged her not to stop, but, she said, family came first. The woman smiled sadly. I always wondered what she might have accomplished. More revelations followed. The local library had a shelf of books Margaret had donated anonymously, women's literature, all with themes of self-discovery. Her garden club friends shared stories of advice she'd given about following dreams, advice she hadn't taken herself. Helen, the neighbor, finally told Richard about the night she'd found Margaret crying in the garden. It was years ago. You were at some conference. She'd just gotten a rejection letter from a publisher. She said she was foolish to try, that her time had passed. I told her it was never too late. But the next week she'd thrown the manuscript away. Richard retrieved that manuscript from the attic. Autumn Roses, about a woman who starts over at 60. He read it and wept for the life Margaret could have had, the support he should have given. On the first anniversary of her death, the family gathered at her grave. The headstone now read, Margaret Shaw Thompson, beloved mother, cherished. Friend, beautiful writer. Elizabeth brought her newborn daughter, named Margaret. Daniel brought his sons, who placed roses on the grave. Richard came alone, carrying a first edition of her published book. I'm sorry, he said to the stone, for all the things I didn't see. Jennifer's baby was born that spring, a girl she named Rose, in honor of Margaret's garden. She sent Richard a photo but didn't ask him to be involved. They'd both moved on, carrying their lessons forward. The house sold to a young couple, writers both, who fell in love with Margaret's studio. They kept the rose garden, adding their own touches. Sometimes they found notes tucked into books, Margaret's handwriting offering wisdom. Water deeply but infrequently. Roses, like people, grow stronger when they must reach for what they need. Prune, The dead wood. What's gone must be released for new growth to flourish. Beauty persists, even in winter. The roots remain alive beneath the frozen ground. Richard dated briefly but never remarried. He volunteered at a literacy program, teaching adults to read. He funded a writing scholarship in Margaret's name at the local college. He learned to tend roses, finally understanding their language, of patience and care. Elizabeth specialized in palliative care, inspired by her mother's final months. She worked with terminal patients, helping them find meaning in their remaining time. She kept Margaret's journals in her office, reading excerpts when families struggled with letting go. Daniel left corporate law to work for a nonprofit supporting artists. He edited his mother's remaining manuscripts, each one revealing new facets of the woman he'd thought he knew. The ripples of Margaret's life continued spreading. Her book found its way to women in similar situations, trapped in roles they'd outgrown. Letters arrived at the publisher. Your mother's words gave me courage to enroll in art school at 55. I left a marriage that was slowly killing my spirit. Thank you for sharing her story. I started writing again after 30 years. My husband now brings me coffee while I work. 3 years after her death, a documentary filmmaker approached the family. She wanted to tell Margaret's story, not just the woman who died of cancer, but the artist who emerged from chrysalis too late, whose legacy lived in her words and the lives she'd touched. The film, The Rose Garden Notebooks, premiered at a small festival. It won awards for its unflinching look at marriage, identity, and the cost of silence. Richard attended the screening, sitting between his children, watching his life's greatest failure become a catalyst for change in others. In the Q&A afterward, someone asked Elizabeth what her mother would think of all this attention. She'd be embarrassed, Elizabeth smiled. Then she'd be glad her story might help someone else avoid her mistakes. And what were those mistakes? The questioner pressed. Elizabeth looked at her father before answering. Waiting too long to live. Thinking love meant self-erasure. Believing it was too late to change. The film ended with a quote from Margaret's final journal. If you're reading this, remember, it's not too late. Whether you have 50 years or 5 minutes, you can choose to be fully yourself. Water your own garden, tend your own roses, write your own story. The ending belongs to you. In the years that followed, Margaret's house became something of a pilgrimage site. Women would drive by, taking photos of the rose garden, leaving notes in the mailbox. The new owners, understanding, created a small memorial corner in the garden with a bench and a plaque. In memory of Margaret Shaw Thompson, who taught us that every ending is a beginning and every silence has a story. Richard visited monthly, bringing fresh flowers, sitting on that bench. Sometimes he talked to Margaret, telling her about the lives she'd changed, the wisdom she'd shared too late for herself but in time for others. You did it, he'd say. You became the writer you were meant to be, just not the way any of us expected. And the roses bloomed year after year, carrying Margaret's legacy in every petal. Beauty born from pain, strength found in letting go, life persistent even in the face of death. Her story, finally told, continued touching lives long after her own had ended. In death, Margaret Shaw Thompson achieved what eluded her in life, the freedom to be fully, unapologetically herself, inspiring others to do the same before it was too late. 5 years after Margaret's death, her story reached someone who would change everything. Dr. Sarah Winters, a neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins, was reading The Garden of Second Chances when a detail caught her attention. The symptoms Margaret described in her protagonist mirrored those in her journals, symptoms that had appeared years before her diagnosis. Intrigued, Dr. Winters contacted Elizabeth. Your mother's case haunts me, she explained. The progression, described in her journals, doesn't match typical glioblastoma. I'd like to review her medical records. Elizabeth hesitated but agreed. What she learned shattered everything they thought they knew. Your mother didn't have glioblastoma, Dr. Winters revealed after weeks of investigation. She had a benign meningioma that became malignant due to delayed treatment. If caught early, it would have been operable, treatable. She might have lived another 20 years. The news devastated the family. Richard, now 75, collapsed when Daniel told him. The guilt that had haunted him multiplied tenfold. "I killed her," he whispered. "If I hadn't been planning to leave, if she hadn't been trying to protect me." But Elizabeth, reading through her mother's journals again, found a different truth. "I've decided to wait on the tests. Not for Richard, not for the children, but for me. I'm afraid of what they'll find. Afraid of hospitals, of losing control, of becoming a patient instead of a person. Perhaps I'm being foolish, but this is my choice." Margaret hadn't delayed treatment solely to protect others. She'd been afraid, human, flawed like everyone else. This revelation sparked a movement. Elizabeth and Daniel established the Margaret Thompson Foundation, dedicated to early detection and patient advocacy. The foundation's motto came from their mother's journals. "Your story matters. Your health matters. You matter." Richard threw himself into the foundation's work, funding, research and awareness campaigns. At their first major fundraising gala, he gave a speech that went viral. "My wife died because we all failed her, including herself. We failed to see her. She failed to value herself enough to seek help. The medical system failed to catch her fears and address them. Let her death mean something. Let it save others from the same fate." The Foundation's first initiative was a program training doctors to recognize when patients were avoiding care out of fear or misplaced selflessness. They called it the Margaret Protocol. Jennifer, now married with 2 children, became an unexpected ally. She shared her perspective at Foundation events. "Margaret forgave us before we forgave ourselves. She used her ending to find her beginning. That's her true legacy. Not the cancer, not the betrayal, but the courage to become herself when it mattered most." The impact rippled outward. Margaret's books, published posthumously, became required reading in medical schools alongside literature programs. Her story was taught as a case study in both women's studies and healthcare communication. 10 years after Margaret's death, the local library dedicated a wing in her honor. The Margaret Shaw Thompson Reading Room housed her manuscripts, journals, and a collection of women's literature. Above the entrance, they inscribed her words. "A room of one's own isn't selfish. It's necessary." Elizabeth's daughter, young Margaret, grew up surrounded by her grandmother's words. At 15, she won a writing contest with an essay titled, "The Woman I Never Met Who Taught Me Everything." "My grandmother died before I was born," she wrote, "but she lives in every choice I make to be myself, in every boundary I set, in every dream I pursue without apology." The essay caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who approached the family about telling Margaret's complete story. The resulting film, The Rose Garden Testament, premiered at Sundance to standing ovations. Richard, now 82, attended with his children. Watching his life's greatest failure transformed into a catalyst for change broke something open in him. After the screening, he spoke publicly for the first time about his own journey. "I spent 47 years married to a remarkable woman I never truly saw. I've spent every year since trying to see others the way I should have seen her. Margaret's death taught me that love isn't possession. Marriage shouldn't diminish but enlarge us. Every person deserves to be truly seen." The documentary sparked a nationwide conversation about identity in marriage, the cost of silence, and the importance of self-advocacy in healthcare. Book clubs discussed Margaret's novels. Support groups formed for women feeling lost in their roles. Medical schools revised their curriculum to include training on patient psychology and fear-based avoidance. On what would have been their 60th wedding anniversary, Richard made a pilgrimage to Margaret's grave. He brought her favorite daisies, and a letter he'd written but never sent. "Dearest Margaret, I've spent years learning what you tried to teach me in life. Your roses still bloom. Your words still inspire. Your legacy lives in every woman who reads your story and chooses herself. I see you now, the writer, the dreamer, the woman who was so much more than my wife. I'm sorry it took losing you to find. You, wait for me. I have so much to tell you. Yours at last, Richard." He lived another 3 years, dedicating his remaining time to the foundation and to sharing Margaret's message. When he died at 85, his children found boxes of letters he'd written to Margaret but never sent. Apologies, revelations, promises to do better. They buried him beside her, finally united in understanding if not in life. His headstone read, "Richard Thompson, husband, father, student of life's hard lessons." The foundation flourished, expanding globally. The Margaret Protocol became standard practice in hospitals worldwide. Her books were translated into 30 languages. Writing workshops bearing her name opened in small towns and big cities, giving voice to women who'd been silent too long. 20 years after her death, Margaret's grandchildren gathered to dedicate a memorial garden at the hospital where she'd been misdiagnosed. The garden featured her beloved roses and a fountain inscribed, with her words, "If my life must end, let it mean something. Let it be a lesson, a warning, a beacon. Let no woman wait too long to live. Let no person die with their story untold." Elizabeth, now in her 60s, spoke at the dedication. "My mother's death was preventable. Her silence was learned. Her sacrifice was unnecessary. But her legacy is unstoppable. She bloomed late, but in her blooming, she taught us all how to grow." The ripples continued. Laws changed, requiring better mental health screening during routine medical visits. Insurance companies covered preventive care more comprehensively. Marriage counseling evolved to emphasize individual identity within partnership. Margaret's great-grandchildren grew up in a world shaped by her story. They learned in school about the Thompson effect, how one woman's tragedy transformed healthcare communication and gender dynamics in marriage. 100 years after her birth, scholars still studied Margaret's case. Her journals were digitized, her manuscripts analyzed, her life examined as a pivotal moment in women's history. The house where she'd lived became a museum and writer's retreat. But her greatest legacy lived in the countless lives changed. Sarah, 45, who left an emotionally vacant marriage after reading Margaret's story doctor. James, who developed a screening tool for fear-based medical avoidance. Maria, 62, who enrolled in college after raising 5 children. Thomas, who learned to see his wife as a person, not just a role. Countless others who chose life over duty, voice over silence, self over sacrifice. The rose garden remained, tended by generations of caretakers who understood its symbolism. Every spring, people left notes among the blooms. "Thank you for teaching me it's not too late. Your words gave me courage to choose myself. Because of you, I went to the doctor in time. I'm writing my own story now." In the end, Margaret Shaw Thompson achieved in death what eluded her in life: the freedom to be fully herself, and in doing so, freed others to do the same. Her story became a beacon for those lost in roles they'd outgrown, a warning against silence, and a testament to the power of claiming one's narrative, even at the end. The final entry in her last journal had been prophetic. "Perhaps my ending is someone else's beginning. Perhaps my silence will become someone else's voice. Perhaps my death will teach others how to live. If so, then nothing was wasted. Not the pain, not the love, not even the mistakes. All of it matters. All of it leads somewhere. Even roses grow from earth that was once something else." As another spring arrived, the roses bloomed again, red as blood, red as life, red as the courage it takes to be fully human. They nodded in the wind, eternal witnesses to a life that ended too soon but echoed forever, reminding everyone who passed. Your story matters. Your health matters. You matter. Tell it while you can. Live it while you're here. Bloom where you are planted, but remember, you can always transplant yourself to better soil. Margaret Thompson died at 68, but her life truly began afterward, in the words she left behind, in the lives she changed, in the courage she inspired. She became immortal not through avoiding death, but by showing others how to avoid a life half-lived. Her gravestone bore one final quote, chosen by her children. She bloomed late but gloriously, and in her blooming, taught us all how to grow. Visitors often found fresh roses there, left by strangers whose lives she'd touched without ever meeting them. The cemetery groundskeeper, who'd watched this phenomenon for decades, would tell people, "Some folks impact the world while they're living. Others, like Mrs. Thompson, change it after they're gone." Death ended her story, but it began countless others. And so Margaret's legacy lived on, not in the manner of her death, but in the awakening her life inspired. She became a symbol, a cautionary tale, and ultimately, a guide for those brave enough to claim their own narratives before time ran out. In boardrooms and bedrooms, hospitals and homes, her message echoed, "Don't wait to live. Don't shrink to fit. Don't silence your story. The roses still bloom every spring, carrying her message through time, their petals unfurling like the pages of books yet to be written, stories yet to be told, lives yet to be fully lived." The end.